Hey everyone, it's Finn here, joined with John and CJ from the SDGC for part 2 of our Final Fantasy XVI review. Uh, so what's up, guys?
Here's a question for you, Finn. Are we doing light spoilers?
We are going to have to do light spoilers just by general,
Yeah.
but we are going to try and be vague when we can. But because we are talking about the latter half of the game, spoilers may come into it, but we're not going to be very explicit about it. At least that's my goal.
Okay, cool.
But I mean, when we're talking about the plot, like eventually things are going to pop up,
Yeah,
you know?
right. Okay, cool. No, works for me. And we've
So, John, obviously everyone knows John, but CJ is also notable for here because he actually reviewed the game early for his publication. So, what's up, Siege?
Hey man, yeah, I reviewed the game over at Game Critics. I didn't get it in time for embargo. I didn't finish in time for embargo, so I think my review's from like a week after. Put in about 60 hours. I wasn't on the last of these discussions because that day I had finished the game. Um,
And you had to write the review.
I had to write the review. Full disclosure, I've virtually forgotten everything that's happened in this game. The back half is a little bit fresher in my memory, so it's a good thing we're talking
That's
about
good.
that now. But yes, alcohol and driving games have completely destroyed that part of my brain right now. So
There you go. Well, for those that listened to part 1, or for those that didn't listen to part 1, part 2 is going to pick up after you gain the Ramu icon and change hideaways, and we enter the 5-year time skip.
we're in an abandoned airship now.
Yeah, we are.
We abandoned the ship.
airships.
We are hanging out in that airship. So as someone who not only did I finish the game, I am halfway through my New Game Plus Final Fantasy mode playthrough.
I have just defeated Garuda in my Final Fantasy mode.
So I'm doing something.
And I uninstalled the game from my PS5 SSD.
because you needed freedom.
Yes.
So Finn, I'm actually doing something interesting. I am playing New Game Plus Final Fantasy mode with only the icons that you get according to how the story goes,
I saw you put
and
that.
I am
yeah.
having a blast.
I gotta tell you, I am loving Final Fantasy modes remixed like fights and encounters. In the very beginning, like in the first mission when you're in the forest with
There's
Cid,
a chimera there,
and there's a fucking chimera that pops up, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Like the S rank notorious marks are just showing up now as regular enemies.
dude, I'm just I'm like there's like iron giants running around now.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, so
So second half of Final Fantasy. Here's the question for you both. At least John. When we were talking about it the first time, has the second half of the game enhanced or detracted from your overall
enhanced
opinion?
it.
That's right.
This is tied basically with Final Fantasy VI as my favorite in the franchise, and I never thought I would say that.
Since we don't actually do hard review scores, I am currently putting it easy top 3. Yeah, it's a top 3 one for me.
And Siege,
Which is weird because at its core, it is so divergent
Yeah.
from my other favorites, but it does what it does so
well, I
well.
want to know what CJ thinks as somebody who is not into the franchise as we are. Like CJ, after you finish
Yeah.
the second half of the game,
So
yeah,
the second half's interesting because like the early hours of the game do take a bit. I know I wasn't here to talk about it. I won't like dwell too long, but yeah, like the game takes a bit to like really get into. I think it takes like about like 5 or 6 hours for it to really start and for it to really like get going. Maybe it's just me because I already played like the first 3 hours. Like I had played the first 3 hours already before, so I was kind of exhausted by them. But yeah, the second half picks up significantly. You know, there's like more confidence in its like design and its combat. I think the story does some interesting things. I think no spoilers. I think a lot of the more interesting characters like don't necessarily like Clive still is like the most interesting character in the second half, right? I feel like they haven't given much to Jill. They still hadn't given much to Jill. They still haven't given. I think like Torgal had more development than Jill, than Gav, than whoever else, right? Like again, I'm not gonna spoil. And I think that's still the game's biggest sin throughout. But I talked about that on the actual live show where it's like this is more of like a one man versus like the world kind of deal, and I know it's like that's kind of like that's not the norm for a Final
Well,
Fantasy game. So someone like me, yeah, you have a party, you have, but like it's still like Clive's story. It's not like a party story, right?
well,
You have a road.
well, what's
Go,
what? No, I was
sorry.
just gonna say, CJ. Like, what's interesting about that is, like, on a macro level, I agree with what you're saying. But what's interesting is there's actually a ton of development given to characters like NPCs that you wouldn't expect. Like Quentin, for example. Like, I won't spoil what his story is.
Wasn't expecting
Like,
that.
yeah, like I was like, whoa! I was like, wow. Okay.
But I think for me that's we discussed this briefly in part one, which is even though the side quests like mechanical structure is very basic and very MMO influenced, what makes them excel is because out of nowhere, what your simple thing of like talk to three villagers and then pick up this item uh turns into this like crazy involved world development or character development moment that you just did not see coming.
well,
And the final ones, like each major NPC had their own final like
they
quest
did.
chain,
Yep.
and they ended up with some like really cool moments. Like there was a couple moments like the Quentin one, but also the brother and sister.
Yeah, that was so tragic.
That oh man, that one I was like, what? No, what?
Yeah,
What?
that was yeah. Some of these side quests go a direction that you really don't expect. And I knew that they were going to go hard after the side quest with the dad and the boy and the wolf and Chloe.
Yeah,
Like,
that's definitely my favorite of
yeah,
the first
I was
half.
like, oh man, all right, well, all right, setting the tone here. Um, but I was hoping, Finn, to kind of before we kind of talk about like our thoughts on the end game and like how the characters' fates wound up. I wanted to say, if you don't mind, that before, like, when you get your first two icons,
Mhm.
Phoenix and Garuda, the combat is great. By the time you have Rama and you have three, this becomes one of the greatest action RPGs I've ever played. Um,
And by the time you have
oh
all of your
God,
icons and you've mastered some abilities to the point where you can equip them on other
oh,
icons and then mix and match and
so
customize your
good.
entire. So CJ, well, before we jump in that, I do want to follow up on what CJ said because CJ, you are right. I think the biggest complaint I can levy against this game is that they did Jill dirty. I think she had a very strong,
If I could say, like,
brief
the thing
moment.
with yeah, you're right. Like there are moments, right?
Yes.
But I think Jill's thing is she's mostly a tool, the same way Torgal is. Except Torgal you can control, and Torgal has like a few big moments. But she's mostly there as like a kind of like a crutch for Clive. She, Britt pointed out that like her character sheet is like, what is it, like less than like few sentences or a few lines. Torgal gets like a whole book basically. It just kind of so to me I feel like they had like a really good character who has like a really deep and like fascinating and like storied like history with the main character, right? Because she's pretty much the only character with the exception of oh my god, of Joshua, who has like any sort of history with Clive, right?
Right.
And you kind of don't follow up on it, and then everything just kind of comes together at the end where I don't know if it's not earned, but it just feels kind of artificial, right? Considering and again, it took me longer to beat the game, so maybe it's just me and like my inflated like playtime. But none of it felt like organic. None of it felt like the devs and the writers and they knew like what to do, right?
Well, for me, it was more. I really liked Jill's moments when they happened, but they it's filled in between with just long periods of her either not being present or being someone in need of rescuing, which is fine, um, in moderation. But I did like her final side quest, as simple and sweet as it was. But all those moments do is make me wish we had more of her. So I get what you're saying, and I just wanted to follow up so you didn't like I didn't want to just
No,
gloss
you're good.
over that.
You're good. You're
But
good.
like so like John said, the combat system once you start unlocking other icons just becomes another level. So I would like to ask you guys for the final missions, What was your breakout? What was your kit? What were you using?
Well, so I'll toss up my favorite abilities as opposed to like the icons I like to use best.
The icons are not.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine because it's not a spoiler to announce who the
Right.
icons are because that's the big
Right,
marketing push was
exactly.
here are the
Yeah,
fucking
oh no,
icons.
no, I just meant because at
Yeah.
that point I was mixing and matching things.
Oh, that's fine. That's fair. Okay.
So ignition was always in the rotations just because ignition rules.
And I'm gonna say this just because CJ wasn't here the first time. John, I know you liked Ignition, but have you ever tried the remix to Ignition?
The fuck out of here, you piece of
Wow.
shit. God
Yes!
damn.
Wow.
All right, anyway,
Oh.
John, you're
Ruined the
saying?
whole review.
Yeah, fuck it. Hey, Final Fantasy 16 mid.
N-
Finn's jokes mid.
Mid is the best character, so
Oh my
that's
god,
actually a very
shut up!
compliment.
Jesus.
There was a character named Mid, I forgot. Yes,
Oh,
there was a character
oh
named Mid,
my
and I had to try to
God.
like keep myself. All right, sorry.
So,
go ahead,
so
John.
yeah, so I love Ignition. It's just Ignition is great for just like, you know, rushing into a group of foes and just running around in a circle, scooping them all up. I always had Gouge on because it's probably, I think, pound for pound, the best way to reduce a enemy stagger bar.
Gouge,
Yep.
really?
Oh yeah.
Oh, Gouge. Gouge is cool because again, like I approach this like a character action game. Like Gouge like worked for like you said, John, like getting like
It melts the stagger
staggering
bar.
bigger enemies, and then getting rid of grunts, right?
Yeah.
Like you can wipe out like an army with that
Yep.
thing.
Um,
Which is great.
Giga Flare is insanely cool, so I kept that around. Judgment Bolt, if you level it all the way up, Judgment Bolt will wipe the map. And I also like to I got a shout out Zantetsuken. Great way to, again, very similar to Gouge, but a little more powerful. And I like the way that Zantetsuken is like all of Odin's moveset is tied into charging up Zantetsuken, which I think is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked, you know what I really liked was Shiva's mobility. Like
Yeah.
the ability to just dash around. I thought was really cool. Honestly, like if I was to be underwhelmed by anybody's moveset, it would have to be Titan.
No.
I'm a fight you on that one. Titan was
hold up.
my
So
guaranteed mainstay.
so Titan I kept too for sure. I kept the shield. Because that
the counter. It's
no
really fucking
the
game
count,
changer.
especially if you had one of the rings on, you could get you would guarantee like a few counters, right? You follow that up with a raging fist, you're fucking going full Kenshiro on some like.
See, why would I want?
That's the
why
thing.
would I want a counter when I could just equip the Berserker ring and get that sick ass attack boost when I dodge, when I do a perfect dodge?
The thing is, like I countering, and I know this isn't like an actual like traditional review thing. It's like so countering, dodging, and like parrying in this game isn't as like rewarding as it should be. The game really wants you to be offensive because again, most of its like defensive abilities aren't necessarily mapped to anything. So you got to pray that you either dodge, really well, or you can strike a sword at the exact moment. So I need like a perfect guard, like what is it, ability, right? Hence why that shield works in tandem with it. I love Titan. I can't believe like Titan's so fucking good. The windup is really good. The upheaval is awesome, especially if you have a group of people like in front of you. Oh my god!
Upheaval also melts their stagger bar.
I like aerial blast better, just because for smaller enemies, watching them all get sucked up into that tornado, and then you just snipe them with a Giga Flare. It's incredible.
But isn't that the beauty of this combat system? Is you could have entirely different builds and love the combat equally, just in very different ways. So that John, any other ones that you used?
Those are my favorites. Those are my favorites.
Okay. CJ?
Let's see, like so I already mentioned the Raging Fist is a great one. The Titan Shield is great. The whole what is it? The Dancing Steel is really good. Especially like towards the end, I mostly use like any of the Odin ones, right? I'm like fuck this shit. Like I don't know if it's a spoiler, and I apologize.
It's not.
Okay, so like that was mostly most of where like my tactics were, right? I didn't like any of the lightning based attacks. I use gouge already. So I already said that gouge is really good again for
Yep.
staggering and for like clearing up like a bunch of grunts. Um, ignition's good. But again, like once the game opened up, like I was mixing and matching like a lot of the other ones I just said. Wind up I used for a bit. Let's see, I didn't use any. Yeah, that's pretty much giggle. No, that I pretty much like what I had just said. I think I really went hard for like all the Titan abilities.
Yeah. So for me, um, I stuck with Phoenix. I never actually changed his up. I would swap between the wing and the scarlet like spinning one and ignition. I would flip them depending if I was doing single enemies or groups. And then Titan just stayed because Titan always did the most damage to a staggered enemy for me. A perfectly timed wind up just melts an HP bar. It's fantastic,
Did you at
especially.
least level up your skills though, Finn, with all those ability points?
I did by the end.
My
Yes.
God, it was
So,
bothering me.
but the thing is, like, yeah. So by the end of the game, I had close to 40,000.
Finn, why didn't you just level them up?
Bro.
Because then I got Odin and I started leveling them all up. It was fine. But the problem is you need I found out you need 120,000 to max everything out for that trophy.
Yes.
So, and they're like, even after a full playthrough of Final Fantasy mode, you'll be about 30K
What I
short.
love
And
though,
I'm like,
Finn,
are you kidding? What? Like,
Finn,
come on.
what I love is that you can respec at no cost anytime you want.
Yes, that is super cool. So yeah, I mean, so I used but then Titan is where so Titan I also kept unchanged. So Phoenix and Titan I did not add anything to. And then Odin was my other third mainstay. I do want to say though, Dancing Steel, while being the absolute best way to build up your Zanketsu meter, what an asshole, especially in Final Fantasy mode. That long ass wind up to pull it off.
Mhm.
Like you get knocked out of it so often. I'm just like, just do it faster. Come on. But I love to have a level 5 bar filled, and then once I hit stagger, I good it off. Then I hit them with a wind up. Then I hit them with Dancing Steel because it freezes every meter. And then I've almost built up a level 5 again. Then I hit them with the Phoenix attacks, and then I pull off another Zanketsu, and it's brilliant. It's beautiful. So, but I will say, I for the third ability on Odin, I added Giga Flare.
Good.
Because that is just too good not to.
Good.
Anyway, that's the beauty. I really like the Chronolith trials because it forced me to learn and use the abilities I usually neglect.
Yep.
But yeah, so combat super great in this game. I don't think many people, and you know what, and this is where a lot of people I don't agree with. They'll be like, "Oh, this game's so easy. All you have to do is press one button a bunch." And I'm like,
that's not true.
They're using all the rings, and which is fine. That's what they're there for. But don't knock the battle system because you're choosing to use accessibility items. You know what I mean? Like you're using items that are purposely designed to simplify and make the combat accessible for people that might need that. And then you're grading the combat based on you using that. And that's the part I don't
also
get,
just for context as to like the difficulty jump between normal mode, because I played on action.
Oh yeah,
and then the difficulty,
the jump from story to Final Fantasy mode is get it? It's staggering.
Shut up. I died once during the regular story mode on my first playthrough. I just killed Titan in my Final Fantasy mode playthrough. I've died 11 times. Like it's
5 more and you're
hard.
Good.
Shut up, Finn. God, you're awful tonight. The worst.
Unlike this game, which is delightful.
This game is delightful.
So CJ and John, who are your favorite secondary characters in this game? No Torgal, no Cid, no Jill, no Clive.
Bro, those are like all 5 of the characters I remembered. Goddamn. Let's see, secondary
Byron,
characters.
it's not close.
Byron's cool. I like
Uncle
Byron.
Uncle Byron is
I think with
great.
Byron, like he adds a lot of levity to this. I like the bits where like Clive has to take him and like a few other characters like fighting, and then it's like this really cool like ragtag like group of like adventurers on something. He's like a lot of levity. It's weird because the Rossfield family's kind of fucked up, and you have like Byron who's like he just wants to like
He just wants to help his nephew.
he wants to help his nephew, which I love because again I'm close to my uncles, and then he also just wants to restore like the good name of like the Rossfield of like that family name, right? Like he's something of a legend himself. He's something of like a capable fighter. He kind of brags about it. So he's just trying to do good by his nephew and by his name.
Now I will say that Byron is second only to Dion, who is probably honestly like up there with Clive as the biggest badass of the entire game.
I'd
Dion fucking rules. And it's really cool to see Square make some very positive, progressive choices with his character. That I was not expecting, but I welcome. I greatly welcome that. And like Square could have kind of gone the cowards route with Dion, and they didn't. And I really appreciate that. I think that was really cool. Plus, just I mean, Dion is a dragoon, and he's Bahamut. Like, what's not to love? And Dion factors into the story in a major way in the second half of the game.
Oh yeah,
and plus he also gives you one of the greatest boss fights ever in Bahamut.
Yeah, we finally have someone that can rival Donald Duck in the.
It was bound to happen sooner or later.
Canon. Yeah, it's great.
But Byron and Dion. I got to give some love to Yote. Secret best girl in the entire game.
I like Joshua.
What's that?
I like Joshua.
Joshua's the main character though.
Okay, right.
Ain't nothing side about Joshua.
Yote is great.
Yote is great. Although I don't know if it's obvious yet, but my answer is 100% mid.
Mid
followed
is
by
fantastic.
Gav. I love that just so minor spoilers because we're talking about characters in the second half of the game, but I love that both her and her dad have simple names that are actually just shortened versions of the dumbest names possible.
Yeah. Also want to give a shout out to a suspicious character. Who led Hugo to the hideout. Great, amazing character. Suspicious character.
Yeah, that guy. Who
his name is literally suspicious character.
And he did perpetrate the greatest act of violence in the entire game. Like it was him being actually good at his job that led to some real bullshit.
He was very good at being suspicious, Finn. He was fantastic.
Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious.
Now, I will say that there are some characters that didn't work for me, or that I found mildly disappointing. And I want to stress that the character I'm about to talk about has nothing to do with the voice work, because David Mencken did a brilliant job bringing Barnabas to life. But at the end of the day, I don't feel like Barnabas mattered all that much. We didn't see much of Barnabas until the very end of the game. And it was clear at a certain point who the villain in this was, and it was clear that Barnabas was not the main villain. And I feel like Barnabas was kind of just reduced to, a lackey for the true villain. And I even thought that the fight with Odin was a bit underwhelming and not quite what I was expecting. Still a good boss fight, but you don't ever really mix it up with Odin. You just kind of fight Barnabas. Now, there is a moment with Barnabas that is really cool that happens on the ocean, and I won't spoil it.
Yep.
But
the true boss fight, I see what you mean. Especially, you can't be the one that follows Bahamut.
Right.
And not step it up a bit.
Right. Like, I feel like putting Barnabas's fight after Odin, or after Bahamut, kind of did Barnabas a disservice. That said, the main villain, while it was pretty standard, you know, JRPG god fare, um, it's still at this point the greatest final boss fight in the entire franchise. From just fun and spectacle and hype, it was a really really great way to kind of flesh things out at the end. Which
Yeah, that's a good question. CJ, final favorite boss fight. Doesn't have to just be an icon fight, but just favorite boss in the game
Oh,
that you can recall.
Titan Lost, 100%. Like that. That is like, what is it? I talk a lot of like about like Kingdom Hearts 2, and how like they use scale really well. That game kind of did the same thing. That fight did the exact same thing. Very arcadey, very over the top. Some of the best music. I really want a full soundtrack release just for that song. Like I'm waiting for like a Square to drop it because
July 19th, I think.
July 19th. Okay, because the music that played, that like bizarre club music that plays while you're fighting, like incredible, absolutely incredible. I think that will go as, that's like one of my all-time favorite boss fights in any video game. Again, rivaling like the very best of like what the original God of War games, the clips I've seen from Azura's Wrath, a lot of the Kingdom Hearts fights. Like this is like incredible.
From a scope perspective, I feel like the boss fights in this game shit all over what God of War has done, but that's just me.
Right, yeah.
I don't think it's we need to make comparisons. They definitely got inspiration from the way God of War approached.
I think the way a lot of like this character action games do this, right, where every hack and slash game has to have like this hulking titan of like a fight.
Yeah.
That's very cinematic. You're sacrificing a lot of control, but you're also like, you're supposed to like kind of be engaged with like how everything looks, which I like a lot.
So,
mine's Titan. I'm with CJ. Bahamut was great and is up there, but there was just something about the way Titan made it feel like I 100% got Poseidon vibes from God of War 3, but also just the greatest kaiju battles of all time. And I do want to throw out a shout out to the final sequence of fights for allowing Final Fantasy to go full anime and channel pure Dragon Ball Z, and it was absolutely incredible.
I know what you're talking about. All-timer like moment right there. That shit was great, even though I was already frustrated by the time I got there.
Like, I've got one that you guys probably weren't expecting. It's not Titan and it's not Bahamut. I've got.
But you already said Bahamut.
What's it? I was going to say no. I know I didn't. So I've got two for two different reasons. From just a pure fun standpoint, the final boss was great for me because I love like a big epic showdown at the end of a Final Fantasy game, and some of those games have disappointing final bosses. This was not one of them. I was hyped the whole way through. It was such a good fight.
All right, so John, no, finish what you're saying, but then I got to follow up on you.
My favorite boss fight was the, and this isn't a spoiler because you expect these enemies in a Final Fantasy game. Was the Behemoth boss fight? Because. And Derek and I were talking about this earlier today. Final Fantasy XVI, because like behemoths have been kind of like for example, in Final Fantasy VII Remake, a behemoth was like an optional side boss. In Final Fantasy 15, the behemoth was just a regular boss that you fought near the beginning of the game. But in this, Final Fantasy 16 took a classic Final Fantasy monster and made it a true like terrible, horrible threat. Again, it's throwing meteors at you and comets, and I love, like, the behemoth is such an iconic Final Fantasy monster, and there's a sense of like just power and majesty and dread in these creatures, and I love that Final Fantasy 16 treated the behemoth the way the older games did, just like this near unstoppable force.
Because Bahamut was always like the end all, like one of the final monsters that you can encounter, and it always would wreck you if you were not prepared. I would think just overall, I think the monster designs in 16 were all incredibly strong, even though one of my gripes of the game is that the amount of monster types are very limited, especially at the expense of several Final Fantasy classics that I was expecting to show up at
So
some
I've got
point. Tonberries
so
and cactars
I've
and
got something to say
whatnot.
about that.
Okay.
At the point where I'm at in Final Fantasy mode, those classic Final Fantasy monsters like Aramans and like Iron Giants and Curls and stuff, they're just showing
Hmm.
up as regular enemies.
Right. I know. And but they were already in the game. I'm talking about like so we know RPGs do this a lot. Action games do this a lot, where they'll have one enemy type and then recolor it
Yeah.
and rename it and put it in a.
I mean,
but
old Final Fantasy
compared to
games
other,
do that too.
yes, I just
Okay.
said that they do that. But I'm saying in Final Fantasy 16, there's much less variety in the enemy types, and it opens up later on when they start bringing in bigger type enemies
Right.
to mix it up. But I was hoping for more types of enemies to fight. That's all.
I like that early in the game, like rancid and evil chocobos like run at you, and I thought that was the funniest thing in the entire world.
I will say that
I had to pause. I had to pause because I was cracking up at the fact that I had to fight like an angry chocobo. I don't
evil
think you
the
guys
evil
understand.
chocobo Notorious Mark, though, with his fucking choco meteor attack,
Red
was
Comet.
phenomenal. Loved fighting Red Comet.
I will say that it was so cool to see like updated takes on some classic Final Fantasy monsters, like the like Lich, for example, or the another favorite monster type of mine, just from a design perspective, was the Iron Giant. I love the design.
Yes, they did that really
Loved
well.
the design of the Iron Giant, and again, like Iron Giant started popping up after the boss fight, started popping up as an enemy, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like it, like the yeah, I love. I don't think there's a single monster design in this that I didn't really like.
Agreed.
And I also love the fact that, like,
Ooh,
even though
John.
cactars aren't there, there's a flyer that says that their needles are used to cure erectile dysfunction, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and there's also a kid says that he would like a kid in the hideout mentions all the monsters he would like as a pet, and he says, but he wouldn't want a cactar because they're too prickly. So they exist in the
they're
world.
there.
And hey, who says that potential maybe one day we'll get DLC or
like
something?
some new hunts or something.
So John, you know what enemy type I think a classic enemy that I would love
What's
to
that?
see in the Final Fantasy 16 design style? A mind
Oh
flayer.
yeah, that'd be good.
So anyway, battle system's incredible. The monster design's awesome. Let's go back to the story, because we've talked about characters, but as a whole, the story. What are your thoughts? And we are gonna have to get a little spoilery, but try and be vague when you can, or generalized. But Final Fantasy comes down to two things: combat and story. So let's end on our story, so we can.
It's one of the better Final Fantasy stories, in my opinion. I really enjoyed the narrative, and a lot of this is helped by the incredible voice acting performance. Like, I can't think of a single bad voice actor.
The voice cast.
Just
oh my god!
We've talked all day about how awesome Ben is as Clive. The entire cast just knocked it out of the park. Even characters who I felt kind of got the short end of the stick, like Benedicta. It had nothing to do with their voice acting, because the voice acting across the board is just stellar. From a narrative perspective, I really enjoyed what they did here. There's especially there's a cool twist on the whole evil god wants to destroy the world thing right before the final boss, which I thought was really cool. It leans on a lot of those old school JRPG tropes, but at the same time, the lens through which we view them is much different, in that this is a Final Fantasy that is solely focused on one playable character, and as a result, it makes Clive and his story that much more personal to the player, I think, because you're not splitting this out over like an entire party of characters. Like, Clive is the focus, and as a result, I feel like we become more attached to Clive than we normally do other JRPG protagonists who are juggling a party of 5 or 6. Does that make any sense, Finn?
It does. And I think that that's a two-way street. Like, I think it's a plus because it gives Clive more growth and development and focus, but at the expense of other characters, which is also a point of contention for some, like Jill. I think if she was an active character that you were with more, maybe more stuff would happen to her. But I get what you're saying, and I agree as a whole that I think this is one of the strongest Final Fantasy stories, especially in the recent memory ones. I think the voice acting absolutely across the board elevated the entire storyline. I think if the cast wasn't nearly as strong, some moments might not have carried over as
Right.
well. I also want to point out one of my favorite things, because John, you mentioned that Final Fantasy games have a habit of dropping the ball on the final boss, and a lot of times it's because the person you think who's the bad guy isn't really the bad guy, and then the true bad guy pops up at the end with no development and no explanation. Yeah. So, and I gotta say, this is going to be slight spoilers in the sense of I'm going to say a name, but when the final boss says, "Is this is this Logos? Is this like?" And I'm like, "Who the fuck is this guy? Are you gonna pull some bullshit at the end and where the true bad guy is gonna be someone called Logos?" And I was like, "Are you fucking?" And then they didn't. And I was like,
well,
"Oh,
no,
thank God."
like, well,
Okay.
and also, like, I feel like they were just referring to Clive as like a.
Yes, no, I
Okay.
know that, but at the time, he made it sound like maybe there was someone inside
see
Clive
what
that
you're
was
saying.
countering him. As like, "Oh my God, how can you be like this? Is this the results of Logos or something?" And I don't know. But I was like, "Oh no, is there going to be someone else coming in at the 12th hour?" Anyway, point is, they didn't do that, and the game was stronger
agree.
because of it. I'm still mulling over the ending. I don't know where I fall on that because of reasons.
I liked it.
But it is an impactful emotional ending. I just don't know if I personally care
may
for it
not be the
or
ending
not.
that some people want.
Correct. CJ, what about you? I hope that you at least remember the ending.
No, okay. The ending is interesting. I think, like, again, like you said, it's very emotional, very impactful. The theme song that plays, like the song that plays at the end, is really good. As far I didn't know what I was expecting. That's the only thing, because again, I've never played a Final Fantasy game before, or at least one quite like this.
That's the beauty of it, though. There are none like this.
Yeah, that's the thing, and I liked it. I think I like that it ended. You know what I'm saying? Like, there was it ended. The story's done. That's it, right? There's nothing. You just went through this whole journey, and now that's it. What is it? It's never the destination. It's always the journey.
Right.
And then that's my main takeaway, right? Like, if this isn't what you wanted, I mean, you played this game for like however many hours. You have other things to kind of chew on, right? Me personally, I don't know where I land on it. I think it's good. I just don't know if I like love it or hate, right? But that doesn't necessarily detract from like my feelings of the game as a whole.
I get it. So, as a whole, I mean, not just the ending though, because you don't compare it to Final Fantasy games like John and I do. But just as a standalone experience, when you walked away from the game, were you good, bad, or mid?
Oh, so really quickly, like, it's like, for the longest time, Kingdom Hearts 2 was like Square's masterpiece to me. It may be like a masterpiece of like action RPGs in general. This comes close, like, genuinely, of like the two Final Fantasy games, the two mainline Final Fantasy games I played. This towers above virtual, like, anything else, right? If you read my review over at GameCritics.com, I talked about how, like, we're, in my opinion at least, we're in such a drought of like truly great AAA video games, like truly great, like stuff that like justifies the existence of my PS5, right? 16 comes close. Like 16 is like this defining game. It's the same high I've been chasing since Devil May Cry 5. It's the high I've been chasing since Red Dead 2. It's the high I've been chasing since Phantom Pain, right? Where I'm like, why did I spend $500 on a console that I mostly use as a 4K player? This is it. Like this is like the whatever you guys compare it to other Final Fantasy games. I'm comparing it to games in general. Like it is,
and that's fine. That's an awesome way to do it.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, right? Like that. It is to me like the way I look at it. It is like the peak of like what you can do when you have like this dream team. And I think I mentioned on the live show where it's like it's a Chrono Trigger situation, right? Where you get like the best people who have worked on like different facets of like the RPG industry. You get them together and they come up with this, right? So 16, you get people from Square's internal offices, you get people from Kingdom Hearts, you get people from Devil May Cry, you put them all together, and this is what they do, right? And it works out. It's like the peak of like all this prowess, and I walked away more than like satisfied with the final product.
That's awesome. And I know John mentioned, I remember he tweeted out that I really needed this game to be good, and it exceeded expectations. And I mean, John and I have a lot of history with Final Fantasy, and sometimes that can work to a new game's detriment, especially if it changes a lot of stuff. So the fact that two stalwart Final Fantasy fans are this enamored with the final product as well, I think just speaks to the quality of Final Fantasy 16 as a whole.
In a very quick thing, I don't want to like keep dragging this on, but there's a good point at the beginning of the game, and I guess this is spoilers or not, but like
beginning
towards
of the game,
first half, towards the first half where it was like characters learn something that kind of changes like the fabric of like the world, right, and what they believe in. That bit I think is like the devs kind of telling you guys, like fans of like Final Fantasy fans, whatever you think Final Fantasy is, it's not, right? It's the culmination of like 30 plus years of like games. It's different styles of games. The definition of a Final Fantasy game is so loose that it can be just about anything, right? 10 is a very different game from 15. 7 is a very different game from 14, right? What a Final Fantasy game is whatever the current one is. And that's it.
And you're right. And the funniest thing about that whole argument is that we have this same argument every time a new mainline Final Fantasy game comes out. And so that is what makes a Final Fantasy game is if people have to have the argument about what is a Final Fantasy game. That's
what I wonder, right? It's like what were discussions when 11 launched, right? When you're like, it's an MMO, it can't be a mainline one, right? What were the right like what so I think it's dumb because this is clearly Final Fantasy. There's fucking Moogles.
There's Moogles, there's Chocobos, there's Faraga spells.
There's exactly you're you have all these summons, right? They're just in different contexts, but it's still as Final Fantasy can be, right? It's just not the Final Fantasy that I guess you wanted. But I don't think Final Fantasy is ever going to be what you want at that very moment, right? Who knows?
I think it's entertaining to me that someone someone who does not actually own or develop the franchise can define to the developers of the franchise what their game is. Like if Square Enix developed a Final Fantasy game and it called it Final Fantasy, it's a Final Fantasy game. Like,
but it's funny because like, and again, like Yoshi P is someone who like essentially saved the brand from whatever like tanking. You know what I'm saying? Like he's kind of the reason why like Square and Final Fantasy is like this is still like floating, right? I think he's more of an authority on like what Final Fantasy is than anybody, right? So I need him to call like Kingdom Hearts Final Fantasy game. Really,
you know what? The only thing that would have given credence to the argument is if Sakaguchi like did a call and was like, "This is not Final Fantasy. How dare you?" But he did. He said, "This game's fucking great." And Yoshi P killed it. And thank you for my copy that you flew to my home. You're the best. Like, shut up. Anyway, we're getting divergent now. So we'll end it by just saying goodbye and
thank you for the code, Square Enix.
Yeah. Thank you for the code, Square Enix. We look forward to anything else if you're coming out with some DLC or whatever, like we're on board. We're looking forward to it. And if not, thank you for what you gave us. This game was very enjoyable. And shout out to Ben Starr and David Menken and Nina Indus and just the whole cast for crushing it nonstop.
Oh, and please go read my review over at Game Critics.
Yes,
I
will link it in the description of our reviews so that you can check that out.
Perfect.
So, yeah, thank you, everybody. And as John always says, kindness costs nothing. And as I always say, he's right. Just kidding. I never say that.
Whatever,
John. LOL. Raffle Mal. I'm not including the Raffle Mal part.